right, so we are mostly here from the folks who RSVP'd. Um, so Michael sent us an email earlier today with sort of a summary sheet of what we got from the survey. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of just hit the highlights for us, if you
Yeah,
would.
sure. So we in total had roughly about 280 folks respond. That's a combination of the electronic survey and the paper survey. Uh, you can see in some of the demographics. We got a range of people and age across the zip codes. Um, a little bit more heavy into the 50701. The demographics or racial ethnic makeup, 80% roughly white. So there's, um, something to be, aware of there. In terms of exposure to violence, if you look at the types of violence people experience over the past 3 years, majority of folks had not experienced, harm. When we get down into seeing people carrying guns, people seeing carrying knives, hearing gunshots around their home, we see that, roughly, 40-60% of people have at least experienced it one or more times. And just kind of moving down further, when you ask folks if they had seen it or witnessed some of these various forms of violence in their community or in their neighborhood, the not surprising, seeing guns, hearing shots, those are the ones that are rising higher than the other forms of violence. Sadly, 12% to 12% of people in the surveys had seen somebody killed. So, and then overall, in terms of the open-ended, questions, we did a word cloud, and you can see those in there. The community, the police were seen, in positive ways. The schools, the law enforcement are seen as assets. A lot of narrative about getting people involved, transportation, police, more presence of police in the community. So those are some of the brief highlights of what came out of the survey. I don't think there was anything real surprising or contradictory to what we've been hearing in our other forums as well. So that's kind of the 10,000-foot view. Or questions or thoughts?
This might be uh, a little bit more in the weeds than you want with the data, but do we have kind of do we have a connection between like a zip code and the likelihood that someone would have heard gunshots or seen a gun carried by someone who's not a law enforcement officer? Um, if we don't have that, do we have the ability to see if there's a connection between those two?
Yeah, we do have it. I haven't broke it down into easy read, but here's if you look at the questions about, can you see the screen?
Yeah,
When you look at the questions of about whether they have experienced it, witnessed or heard others experiencing this. Here, what I've done is that we had about 20% of the respondents not provide a zip code. So I collapsed all those, and then the three primary zip codes are indicated here. So we do have that. I haven't condensed it. I can, send this out. But when you look at, for example, heard or chase, the first questions, been chased by gangs or individuals. 26% of the folks in 50703 indicated that they had seen this, in contrast to, the 501 or the 50 or the 02. So I've got it here. If there's
okay.
particular questions that you want me to kind of zoom down to, we can, take a look at that.
Do we see that same correlation um, with gun usage or seeing a gun?
um, the question of carrying a gun or seeing someone carry a gun other than law enforcement. 18% of the 0303 said never, in contrast to, the 50, the 01, 25% have never. So you do see some slight differences that carrying a knife. You can see, well, this row here. Hearing gunfires in the home, or around the home. So there are some slight differences, in percentages. I haven't looked to see, statistical, but let me go back up here a minute.
I have a question about that as well. And Joe, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but some of those we might be able to get through actual call data, right?
Right.
So if we see something that we have a hypothesis about, we could go back to the call data and say, oh, well, there are statistically significant higher calls in this geographic area or something.
Right. I think, the fact that we only have 300 here, pulling that data, the call data, the survey data, what we've been hearing from the groups, also the data that ISU folks provided, I think collectively that creates a story of certain area. If we have limited resources, certain areas of Waterloo to direct, resources toward. I think the combination of these different data points, in addition to, what we hear from law enforcement and from the community, can really paint I think a convincing story. Whereas one person may have, a criticism on one source of data, collectively, here's what we're hearing, and we know that there's certain community areas of the community that have higher risk factors in terms of poverty and other, economic opportunities.
Well, there's it's the area in West in West Waterloo that's closest to downtown has been an area that has had some high crime in the past, and that would influence. What was that? Is that under 50701 or 50702? I can't remember. The area around Church Row.
Oh, one.
Oh, one, yeah. So that would influence the data from 01 because, again, that's been an area that's at one time was described as a hotspot. I don't know if it's still a hotspot or not, but so it's not all 703. And of course, the relationship between actual crime and fear of crime is complicated.
Right.
A small number of incidents can generate fear of crime when actually the risk is pretty low of anyone directly experiencing anything like that. And we have to recognize that, when the paper reports a shooting in downtown Waterloo, then some people are going to say, oh, well, downtown Waterloo is this dangerous place to go, and I shouldn't go there, when in fact, the chances of anything happening to you in downtown Waterloo are vanishingly small.
Mm-hmm.
I know I did not hear about the shooting that happened because I was gone that weekend until the 2 weekends ago during the food festival. Last weekend I was eating at Moskie's in Cascade, which is a barbecue place. And I asked him if he went, and he said, well, no, we didn't, but one of our friends did. And there was a shooting right downtown, and I knew nothing about it. But I could tell it's impacting what other people believe about our community.
Exactly.
And whether he would ever even come here with his food trailer now, because that happened during our festival.
Right.
So it was frustrating.
Yeah.
So I guess, the question, Jonathan, is how do you want to, or how does the council want all of this packaged together?
Yeah, so the resolution calls for a list of recommendations looking at short. One second. Sorry, I'm on double duty right now. Here. So the council wanted a list of recommendations for stuff that we could implement in the short term, defined as a year or two, medium term between 3 to 5 years, and then long term 5+ years. I do believe between this data, the ISU data, and whatever we can have publicly shared by PD, I think we all believe that a targeted approach is probably in line. Increasing resources to my neighborhood would be a waste of those resources because my neighborhood doesn't need those resources at this particular juncture. So I think being targeted makes sense. And so within those 3 tiers that we had talked about, understanding that it is the council and others' job to figure out how to navigate keeping these things sustainable, but we also want to be realistic in our recommendations as well, understanding that we operate within a certain confine in this time and place, if that makes sense to everyone.
The role of grant opportunities that to explore or pursue, how do you think the council will view that, since they do bring resources, if opportunity to get to them, but they're also a limited time?
Yeah. I certainly think that that needs to be part of the conversation. Being able to suggest recommendations and then also being able to say, and we also have potential ways to pay for them. I think will be helpful for everyone in this conversation moving forward. Um, we understand that grants are competitive. We'll have to navigate partnerships with organizations to get them into place. Um, but we've applied for grants for other things as well in other departments. So I certainly think that this is something that um, we would also want to make that partnership because there is money. And as counselors, we have to be kind of um, a mile wide and an inch deep on policy. And that's where we're going to rely on folks like you all who are experts to be able to help us navigate um, more specialized situations like applying for grants, how to read those recommendations from a public health perspective, um, what folks are hearing on the ground, which is why we wanted you all to be here on this commission, if that makes sense.
One other data source I was wondering if we have any update is I think at one point there was Waterloo data that looked at the disproportion of minority confinement, incarceration. Do we have any recent data on that?
Well, yes, I don't, the most recent data that I've seen broken down by county was 2016. And that was assembled by a University of Iowa law student. You can get arrests, you can get ch charges that were brought against people. That's in the state data bank and the what do they call it? It's the put together by the Office of Juvenile Justice Planning, OJJP, and so you can find out how many people were arrested for just about any kind of crime that you want in Blackhawk County for about the past 10 years. And that clearly shows a disproportionality in arrests of people of color. It's very, very strong disproportionality in the number of people of color that are arrested for all kinds of crimes versus white folks. And I have some data that we put together on that, which I can share, where we kind of took the whole, and we looked at all 8 urban counties in Iowa. We didn't just look at Blackhawk. We looked at all the counties that are considered urban, Lynn, Johnson, Scott, etc. And every one of them has a disproportionality between the percentage of the population that's people of color and the people that are arrested that are people of color. And
Do
so
you recall, Alan, how Waterloo ranked?
well, I it's pretty
Oh,
damn
wow.
high.
Yeah, yeah.
I can tell you. I have to look up my chart here, but
Well, the reason I ask is, just thinking about grants, like there was one that came out, actually that really kind of looks at what we've been doing. It's called Building Local Continuums of Care to Support Youth Success. But one of the criteria or things that they look at is, how does the population at the local level but the proportion of incarceration, especially if you're looking at high risk. This one, for example, at the local level, these categories support the efforts of eligible applicants to conduct a planning and assessment process that will identify gaps and assist in achieving cost savings through reforms. These savings can be invested in development and implementation of promising practices in evidence-based prevention, intervention strategies as part of a community-based continuum of care for youth at risk of or already involved in the juvenile justice system. So
Here's some data that I have, and I'd be glad to share this chart. Uh, 21. County, 34.5% of the people that were, this is convictions, that were convicted of felonies, 34.5% were Black. And that's versus 9% of the population. Okay. And we have actually Johnson County has a higher disproportionality than we do, which is a little surprising. So that's the kind of thing you're talking about. There were 663 people convicted of felonies in Blackhawk County in 2021. 225 of those folks were Black. Latinx, there's a disproportionality there, but not as great, which mirrors the state data. Which is why 25% of people in Iowa prisons are Black versus 4% of the population, and you cannot, believe me, you cannot account for that by differential offending.
Yeah, because
a lot of it's drugs, and we know that drug enforcement is disproportionately concentrated in minority communities. That's just a reality. And
well, I think that the data from that Brad McCullough from Success Link could offer too could be another data source in terms of high risk youth in high risk situations. So I think we have the case, and we've done the work in terms of pursuing some of these grant opportunities for some interim funding. I think one of the other questions that, Jonathan, you may be able to answer as well is then the extent we know that moving upstream is going to involve working with children and youth and families. So to what extent is the community and the community school system ready to partner on some of these initiatives, because accessing youth can be a challenge in a number of different ways.
Yeah. I think that obviously I can only speak in my role as a city councilor, that obviously we want to build that community capacity. I do think that having a conversation with Dr. Smith and the board of directors for the Waterloo Community School District would be helpful, because we know that the city can't operate, it isn't going to operate in a vacuum by itself. We're going to need to work with lots of different partners, but the school district is going to be a big part of it. The county is going to be a big part of it, as well as private individuals. I think that once we have a list of recommendations and us going and saying, hey, we want to tackle this issue, but this is clearly what we are going to need, or where we believe that we should collaborate, will help us have specific targeted conversations with them that will hopefully move things forward. I think everyone wants kids to be safe. So I think that if we can go with a specific ask, I think that will help in those conversations.
And I should mention, by the way, that you can get these arrests and conviction numbers by age too. So and I'm actually thinking of putting something together on that, because we're having a conference on youth justice IJN is sponsoring a conference on youth justice on October 26th, so I'm thinking about trying to pull some of the numbers. Basically, with their data sets, you could put in any criteria you want, age, whatever you want to, and generate the numbers that way. So I'm thinking about pulling together some of those numbers that I just gave you based on with where I put in 18 or under as the criteria to select the data. See what I come up with there.
I have a question. To Joe Leibel, the last 4 shootings we've had in Waterloo, were they youth or were they adults that were arrested?
Well, there hasn't been an arrest in all of them. Adults, and the last 2 that come to mind were, I'll say older, but they're not that old, 30s. Not young. We have had a couple of 20 somethings, but for the most part, the last couple have been, I hate to say old because they're in their 30s, but not teenagers.
Because I know we're talking about doing a lot of work for youth, but what are we doing for the adults in reform when they come out? We do our best. We're getting, I mean, we're ready for the ones that are ready. If they're not ready, then.
So one of the things, I want to go back to something that Michael was talking about because it piqued my interest. One of the things that I've been really paying a lot of attention to is community care coordination, with getting people connected with the resources and services that they need. And we see this a lot. We see poverty as a predictor to this, and kind of to the point about disproportionately impacted populations. Not all of it, but a large chunk of it comes down to social economic status and poverty. And so if we're talking about moving upstream, it also aligns with the survey results in terms of the assets and what is needed of getting people connected with the resources that are available. And so I think that that's something that I would really like to see considered as a recommendation or a finding, or however we're summarizing that, because I see it across all of our programs, across all of our determinants of health. I'm in the advancing equity, work with the community foundation, and it's something we're very heavily talking about. So I think there's some momentum around it as well.
And Caitlin, I completely agree. And I think I've had this conversation with almost everyone on a one-to-one basis that we have great folks who are doing great things, but we are very heavily siloed. And if you don't know about something, it's almost as if it doesn't exist at all. One of the things that has been kind of on sort of my 2 priorities were some sort of violence interrupter program that have been successful in other cities. But something that I want to look at in the bigger picture is some sort of community connection office, someone that you could call that would be available to anyone that you need help with this, and they can connect you with an organization that does that, or you need help with finding an apartment and getting rent set up. I think one of the things, and I think that's where government can and should play a role is, and I've said this before, I don't want us to reinvent the wheel. I don't want us to replace the great folks who are doing youth sports, or the work that Michelle is doing, or the work that county health is doing. I want us to be the sort of connecting fiber between all of those, so that they can say, hey, call the community connection office, and they'll be able to help you out, and they can send you in the right way. and that is one of the big thing, and we don't have to call it that, but that's one of the big things that I've been throwing around is that our job is to help connect people with resources, not necessarily always provide them. And so that is also high on my list of recommendations as well, because of course everyone needs more funding. But also folks are doing stuff, but sometimes they're running into folks don't know about it. So I agree. Absolutely.
I think that's a great name for it, Community Connection Office. I think it's a great name because it says what it does. And we do that with our participants, and I do that with our
Oh, yeah.
participants. It takes a lot of time. So you better be ready to staff it.
No,
Because it takes a
absolutely.
boatload of time to connect people with what they need. And that's when people are coming into a program and they're not connected, and we have to get them connected before they graduate,
Right.
or they're going to spiral right back.
Well, I think of the last time I presented for your group, Michelle, and I know it's been a while. And we were talking with that woman who needed some additional resources. And I asked if she had talked to the Riverview Center, and she didn't even know. And I won't tell Gwen that she didn't know about the Riverview Center, but
I didn't even know about the
right,
Riverview
right
Center.
here. I mean,
And-
here's this kind of big
And that's
organization
the gap.
that's doing fantastic work, but this woman did not particularly know. And so that sort of connection I think is really big, and where we as a city can play the role, rather than trying to do those other things. We can help people get connected, and that can be on the other side too. It can be helping youth sports groups get connected. Maybe there are grant opportunities, or the community foundation can help them out with some things. I don't think it just needs to be a one-way connection. Someone with a problem comes to us and we connect them to solvers. We can help solvers connect to resources so that they can do more work and bigger and better work too.
Have
That
you
was one
ever
thing.
heard of, I'm sorry, have you ever heard of Unite Us?
No.
It's a macro organization. We
Mhm.
get a lot of referrals from different organizations like Pathways for our
Sure.
Momentum program, because it's privately, everything is private.
Okay.
It's HIPAA regulated, and it's all private. And so they're connecting people to us, and then it's up to us to follow up with the people.
Yeah.
But if the city could somehow work with Unite Us, or I wouldn't even think you would have to redevelop the wheel. It's a
No.
huge organization that I think they're based out of Des Moines.
Okay.
But then people can find the resources they need. But check out Unite Us. I know different entities have tried to do things, but why reinvent the wheel?
Right.
Yeah, I started to share a colleague down over in Dubuque. We've done some work, and they created the RU Resources Unite, and it's a private nonprofit that is doing a lot of what we're talking about. The downside, of course, is it's a private nonprofit. I mean, it's a nonprofit, and dealing with all that. My first professional position I had out of grad school was one in a municipality in Connecticut, and my role was the youth services coordinator. And part of what my role was to connect resources, from prevention, education, enrichment to clinical services. There was the hub in the municipality that, we connected, and we developed programs and partnered and with the school, private, nonprofits in the community. And the advantage of it being part of the municipality was, it was part of a department, part of the structure, line item. We were also given charge to, secure funding through state partnerships. And so, I mean, but that provided the stability, and that the Youth Service Bureau is a model out in Connecticut that's a partnership with municipalities in the state, and it's under the juvenile justice prevention work. So, and it was a good model to work with, and the advantage of it in some ways is that, you know, because it was part of the municipality, you know, individuals that came into the office, they are already paying through taxes. They were, you know, we were not fees and things like that.
Does United Way still have the 211 number, or has it been? I mean, and that's supposed to do that, but of course, a lot of people don't even know it exists. You have to, if you're going to have a resource referral group, you have to, people have to know that they can, that supposedly I know when it was set up, you could dial 211 and find out about services in the community. And you might want to check with, you know, with United Way and still see if they're still operating it. And also I would just say, you know, I've been in this community for 45 years. Okay. and you know, it always comes up that, you know, people don't know the services that are out there. I mean, I don't know how many dozens of meetings I've gone to where you know, where that's been brought up. And I think it is a problem there, you know, and people have tried to create various resource referral resources in the past. We're not the first time to think of this. And one of the things, of course, you have to be aware of is you can have a service out there, but do people feel comfortable accessing that service?
Right.
And there you get into cultural issues, because sometimes, like with youth programming, you know, for, you know, for frankly, for a Black parent to send their kid to a youth program at UNI can raise not just transportation issues. That's a big issue right there. But also cultural issues and cultural appropriateness. And so you have to recognize that just because a service is out there doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in the community is going to feel comfortable accessing that service. And you have to deal with those cultural issues that come up when you're trying to encourage people to access various services in the community. And you know, that's a reality that we deal with on a regular basis.
So that kind of leads to one question I was going to ask Jonathan about the process of this. When we craft, or when the document is crafted with the recommendations, do you see part of the process taking it back to any groups before it goes to the council?
I think to be cognizant of who is on the commission and others, I definitely think that we probably want to have a conversation with the Blackhawk County NAACP. Might want to talk to some of the folks that we had talked to early in the process who are working in youth areas. Might want to run it through having conversations with the United Way and others. Before I think that there are some groups that we want to just ask about it, because Dr. Hayes does raise a significant point, which is that just because you have a staffed office doesn't mean that office is being useful. And we want folks to have these resources. I don't think anyone wants these things to happen, but I also get that there are long histories that make folks wary of programs like this. So I get that.
Yeah.
So I definitely think we want to have that conversation and hopefully buy-in from those groups so that when we take these to council, when council has discussions about how to implement and when to implement them, it's not just this group of 12 that's been meeting, but there's a broader community aspect to it as well. But I would definitely say Blackhawk County NAACP, for sure, we should have a conversation with them
Yeah.
before they go to council. So with that, and recognizing that we are all busy and it's that time of year, how do we want to handle writing and polishing the recommendations based on data, based on our own sort of backgrounds and those types of things? Because I don't want us to again reinvent the wheel on this. I know that Interim Director Emmerich shared some resources from the CDC. Michael has some resources. Al has some resources. We got some more resources to go through in the chat. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I know a lot of those things are things that we can apply. So do we want to take individual sections? Do we want to, in a week's time, send me our key priorities for short, medium, and long term, and then we see what's common and hash it out at another meeting? I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but also get something that's polished, if that makes sense.
Do we have a skeleton, a framework that we want to work from, and that we got the recommendations?
Mhm.
What else do you think might be part of that or part of that outline or framework?
Obviously I think the big part is going to be the recommendations. I think um either as I'm sort of visualizing it, thinking of like an appendix of potential resources, whether that's grant opportunities or organizations or things that are doing these types of things at the end, so we can look at them. The way I see them is we have a set number of recommendations per unit, a description of what they are, and a general sort of outline of what it would take to implement. Obviously, that step would be up to the city and the department if the city moves forward with those. But I think we want to have probably a short explanation and what it would mean and its potential impact is how I'm visualizing it. But I'm also open to feedback from folks who have written more professionalized policy work.
Well, I think I would guess that your fellow council members are not, they're going to want the synopsis and
Yeah,
briefer is going to be better, but be able to justify and provide the backup for the points.
yes, and I think in my mind, I see it in sort of 6 sections. A preface explaining the work that the group has done, then jumping into the recommendations, starting with short, then medium, then long term, then a sort of overview synopsis of why we are recommending these particular things as a whole, and then whatever appendices of potential partners. I know there are groups that come in and look at crisis intervention programs. There are grants, of course, and things like that, so that we're providing some tools as we're giving them this, if that makes sense.
I think,
I'm gonna need to cut out here, but keep me posted and anything I can do to help. And anything that North End Cultural Center can provide in terms of programming and support, we'll be glad to do it. Okay.
Perfect.
thank you. Now, oh, no. I think one of the things that will should be in the report at some place is the process that we went through, kind
Yeah.
of our methodology, so that it's clear that, you know, there's a concerted effort to gather the voices of as many constituents as possible.
Right.
So that if there's ever, you know, pushback, it's like, well, here's what we tried to do.
Yeah. And that's what I was seeing, sort of that preface as like, hey, here, you know, it wasn't just a sort of scattershot approach, but we did X, Y, Z. These are kind of the results of each of those. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we have to always sort of explain and justify why we took a course of action that we did, for sure.
I think perhaps it's just my busyness and everything. Do we have a list of all the recommendations that have come forward? And we have that list and we now want to provide the narrative, or is there a conversation of the different recommendations? What are we going to move on to the table? What are we going to put to the side? How are we, you know?
Yeah. So I know that there have been some pretty broad conversation. You know, of course, we've gotten the CDC and some other sort of already collected recommendations, but I also know that there have been larger conversations about, as we had today, the community connector position, but even things like establishing a universal basic income experiment and those types of things. So perhaps it might make sense if we have in, let's say, the next week, folks send sort of all of their recommendations, and then I can compile a full list, and then we can either have another meeting, or we can find some sort of asynchronous collaborative way to have discussions about those recommendations and what should maybe make the final report, if that makes sense to everyone.
I guess for me, it just trying to get a sense, kind of a handle around all the recommendations that have come out from the, you know, public forums, you know, the ISU data, you know, what do we draw from CDC?
Right.
So, you know, and then how to, you know, prioritize them. So I think that for me, I need to do that.
Sure.
Do it collectively, or is like, okay, what, you know, what did we hear back in the summer, or, you know?
Okay, so why don't I'll send out an email to everyone right now, and let's say by next Wednesday, so that will be the 20th, if I'm doing my math correctly. Everyone look over their notes and what's been collected, and we'll sort of aggregate everything together. Folks can rank their choices, and then from there, I will share all that out with everyone so we can look at it. And perhaps at sometime towards the end of September, we have one sort of meeting to hash it all out, to get something ready to be written, if that makes sense to everyone. Does that
Was
sound
there-
doable?
Were there, I know I took notes, the community forums that I was at, was there any, notes that were taken that are available, or have they been shared previously, or?
I know Glenn was taking some notes and had wanted to share them. But I don't know if, I have not seen them, so I think time just kind of got away. So I can ask her about those as well.
So
I-
kind
I have
of
a
call
question.
for all the notes and
Yeah.
data recommendations. I'm sorry, Michelle.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My question is, does the city have, does the city have a, I want to say, do they do anything to landlords when they're not doing anything about the violence in their buildings? I know we have nuisance ordinances, correct?
Yeah,
Because I know of a young lady who won't even go to her apartment, which Section 8 is paying because there's been so much violence in the apartment building where Section 8 paid for an apartment.
right,
And from what I'm hearing, the police are there all the time,
right,
or a lot of the time. So it's a very big hot spot. And that's an apartment building on Russell Road. So I'm like, I mean, this is about ending the violence in the community. What are we
right.
doing to make the landlords evict people if they're in in their housing? I mean, I don't know what we can legally do, but it's an issue.
Yeah, and I don't, I know that we have protections for folks to not be evicted if they are victims of violence, because sometimes landlords respond to those situations by evicting everyone, and then that punishes both perpetrator and victim. So I know that we have some steps to protect folks from that who are the victim, but we can certainly make a recommendation about for other, for looking at other policies to make housing safe for everyone. Because I don't think we have something larger on that. So I think that would be something that you could bring as a recommendation for sure.
Okay, because it seems so wrong that people, they're provided housing,
Right.
but they can't use it because they don't feel safe.
Right.
And so what is that landlord doing to get the tenants out that
Sure.
are violent?
Yeah.
So
For sure. So
I'm sure Joe Leibold knows where I'm talking about, which apartment building.
I do, and it doesn't qualify as a chronic nuisance because there's certain crimes that do not qualify.
okay. So and that's a thing for us as policymakers to think about. So in the interest of everyone's time, I'll send out that email, send our recommendations by next Wednesday. Then I'll circle back and we can figure out time to parse through them and then come up with some sort of written document with a presentation, hopefully sometime in probably October, just given everyone's time. Sound like a plan? Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for taking time and have a good rest of your Tuesday.